The first half of the 20th century was the golden age for smoking. Everybody was doing it, and definitely around like 1950, 1960, it reached a peak of smoking where everybody just thought that it was a healthy thing. The tobacco industry also just lied. They told that it was in fact healthy, while obviously we now know decades later that it's not healthy at all. And I also told people that it wasn't addictive, which it definitely is. And so in 1956, when a British study came out, actually first study that linked tobacco with lung cancer, the government had a decision to make. So they set up a committee to actually discuss what they should do with this information. Sadly, they ended up actually not taking any action and just letting the tobacco industry get away with just spreading these lies, even though they knew that it was a bad thing. Now, a couple of years later, one of the members of this committee actually came out and he actually explained why the government didn't do anything, or why they didn't publish more of this information, and they didn't push any measurements that would save the lives of so many people that were smoking. And the reason was because, simply said, they were simply very beneficial to the government, as they would pay huge amounts of taxes on these cigarettes that they would purchase a lot of because they were getting addicted, but they would also die like 15-20 years earlier than the rest, so they wouldn't have to actually pay for these pensions or for their retirement. So rationally speaking, in their eyes, it was a good thing. It wasn't bad at all. So they decided not to do anything, and just the tobacco industry just kept lying. And this in turn caused so many people to just die way earlier than they should have been, dying of lung cancer, which, by the way, is a very, very painful death. All because the government just earned a lot of money off of it. Now the same story kind of goes for alcohol. Alcohol is more recently becoming an issue because everybody knows that smoking is very bad, but less people know that actually alcohol has such a bad effect as well. And so things have gone kind of differently. For example, the alcohol industry actually doesn't really lie. They don't say that alcohol is very, very healthy and that it has no harms at all. Instead, they put like a label on your drink where it just says drink responsibly, which is kind of a weird thing in itself, because you put a label on being responsible on something that actually makes you, by definition, less responsible. So in my opinion, that's kind of weird, but it doesn't end there. For example, when in the United Kingdom in 1997, Tony Blair, the new Prime Minister, came into office, he wanted to blow some new life into the war on drugs. So he set up a committee that should work on like a super report on all drugs. And they got to work, they made this super report, but when it came to its publication, to their horror, they saw that the part about alcohol was just completely left out. Now it turned out it happened, the Secretariat had gone to drinks industry to verify their information, the specific part on alcohol, and they had just said that it was not true and that alcohol shouldn't be classified as a drug because it also had some benefits, which is kind of a weird claim to make, but they made the claim. And without further discussing with the actual scientists, they just published this report without the part on alcohol. So you can see here that these big industries like the alcohol with so much money have so much influence. But it doesn't even end here, because then the government and the science itself started working on a separate report on alcohol specifically. So not on all drugs anymore, just alcohol. And the scientists did this as a form of protest because they still wanted information to be out there and the measurements that they want to take to help the alcohol problem to be out there. But when it came to the end results of these two reports on itself, they ended up being published in 2004, both of them. They didn't look alike at all. In the words of the scientists, they said that the other report, the report of the government itself, it looked like it had been wrote by the lobbyists. There was no any good measurements taken, and the actual effective policies that were recommended by the actual scientists, these were just completely left out. So they didn't end up looking anything alike at all. Now these are just two big examples, but they're far from the first or the last time that the governments actually overrule scientifically based advice or facts about nutrition. The truth is that these big industries just have so much power and so much money that they just kind of have the government in the chokehold. The government cannot just turn its back on these companies and just create these policies of which the result would be that the sales would go down dramatically by, for example, alcohol, if they would just make a policy that made all alcohol much more expensive, or that there were no more advertisements advertisements be allowed on television, the sales would go down dramatically. They won't really just do this because they will lose a ton of support and a ton of money. So they're kind of checkmated by these companies, even though there is scientific advice that says that certain things are unhealthy and actually cause cancer, for example. So I made this video to be kind of a wake-up call, because we know to be careful about the things that companies tell us. If they say buy this or eat this, we will automatically be like, is this really the truth, or are they just trying to sell us something? But you might not take the same precautions for the government. However, the same is true and should be true for the government. We must do our own research before we trust anything, even when it's from the government. Most of us just take anything the government says as a fact, but that's simply not the case, because there's just these big industries that have a lot of power. So no, not everything what like the government or the authority says is always the best. You should always do your own research before believing anything or ingesting any type of food. Do your own research and don't take anything for fact.